Okay, this is some biome overviews in Breath of the Wild. Here we're in a coastal tropical zone. A lot of palm trees, ferns, probably pretty warm and humid. Always check the grasses for green. Sometimes you get green when you cut grass, but not here. And check in with the map. This is where we are. Southeast part of the world here. There's a big sand spit that goes out to the east, and then if you travel west, start to get into what would be like a tropical equatorial rainforest. And you can see all the trees there on the map. So we're just gonna travel over that way and keep an eye on, the rocks and the plants, the weather, the temperature, that kind of thing. You can see the rainforest trees, the vegetation looks different, and the geography looks different too. The rocks, I mean. There's a glitchy cow up there. So since this is a wet maritime zone, you might expect to see more vegetation. But something that we didn't talk about too much was the possibility that the soil might not be supportive of greater amounts of biomass. And here's a contact between two different types of rock as we get into this tropical area, rainforest area rather. You can see the humidity starting to ramp up, getting hazy in the air. And this is something that I'm not sure what dictates this happening, but even though the weather gauge is showing that it's not raining, you can clearly see precipitation coming down. And I think there just must be a mechanic where if the humidity is high enough, water will start to fall out of the air. And you can see it, they have the trees kind of glistening on this bridge. can see it like pattering on the ground, splashing up as Link runs here. And these trees are interesting. I think it's a banyan tree, but I'd have to check on it. But it's certainly modeled off of a tropical tree. And I had to keep this in. There's these elemental, you know, dragon spirits, and really electrocuted me while I was in the water here. But you can see the little sun flares, and that's a result of humidity as well in the air. Those are rainbows. And then kind of making our way up different elevations, you can see some vegetation here. This is philodendron, ferns, some like minor palms. And this is the very top of this rainforest area. And those trees that resemble, the leaves resemble banana. And they definitely make like an overstory. And the detail is, you know, to the level of the shadows of the leaves on the ground. And this just gives you a kind of a overview, aerial shot of the dominant vegetation and what's going on here. Waterfalls surrounding an area like this is not super realistic, but we'll forgive that. And then, just to get some more idea of what's going on the ground, there's a fan palm to the left. I don't know a ton about palms. The family's Ericaceae, but we're going to do a day devoted to palms later in the semester. So there we are. That little arrow. You can see there's a lot of different levels of vegetation. And there's vegetation on vegetation, so these cycads to the right, the tall ones, you can see like plants growing on them, which is something you see around here. Call an air plant like that an epiphyte. So, I'm going to keep this in. It's another little spirit. That flower, we will talk about that later in the semester, is modeled after Plumeria, which has some cultural significance in different parts of Asia. And this is a little tip-off that we're getting a Korok. And part of this is a gameplay tactic to get you to get out and explore the world, you know? But they're also interesting, the design. And we're coming up here, if you look at the little map inset on the lower right, I put a shield stamp down that we're approaching with this bridge up ahead. And that marks a transition between the rainforest and a deciduous forest. But you see they do have some transitional, like there's one of those cycad looking plants on this side. So they try to transition it slightly. But this would indicate either a microclimate that experiences frost or that isn't humid year-round. So the map is pretty big, but it's not big enough to have like, really accurate transitional zones. But they do, you know, they do their best. We're just climbing an elevation here. The horse can't go up something that's too steep. And again, what could be a limiting factor in this area is soil quality, or just soil amount, because we're kind of up on some rocky areas. There might not be enough soil accumulated. And this is just looking back. And this is daytime. We're heading west again from the spot we just stopped. So we're still low latitude. Moving west. Getting into some semi-arid, wet, dry type areas. We're coming up here, if you look to the left, which is sort of the south. You see palm trees down there. That's another little microclimate, little tongue of beach, kind of traveling up this rift. There would be wind action to blow that sand up in there and collect in that canyon. And there's some palm trees in there that colonized it. And we're going to come across here, again moving west, and get up on a bit of a highland. Again, I would call this semi-arid grassland, but we've gained some elevation. So that's going to affect the temperature. Here we are. If something interesting starts to happen as we get over this ridge, and you see these pine trees. So I'm going to assume that presence of the pine trees has to do with a couple things. To the north of this ridge is a lake, so that's a big body of water. It's gonna put some moisture, humidity into the air. But also as we gain elevation, remember that the air's capacity to hold water is dependent on air temperature. So as air gets cooler, it can't hold as much water, and it'll condense and fall out either as dew, or fog, or rain. So the presence of the lake, in addition with the slightly higher elevation, could have to do with the fact that the climate becomes a bit more humid in this area. Probably cool and humid. If you've ever heard of cloud forests, it's a similar principle. I mean, they look a lot different, but and then from here, move a little bit further west at some point. Yeah, and you look down in this canyon, and that's definitely dry, much drier than what we have up on that ridge. So we'd call this semi-arid grassland or shrubland. These trees are modeled after, I think, baobab trees, if you want to look them up. And that trunk has to do with, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my cat in here. That trunk has to do with water retention. So that's an adaptation to deal with seasonal dryness, seasonal drought. And you can see grass and shrub, so that's where we are. And then from here we'll stay with the low latitude and head over to the desert. And here we are. This is clearly arid, very low precipitation, maybe some humidity in the air, but you know, very little compared to other areas. And you can see the wind blowing soil and sand around and dust. These dunes would not be permanent. They would shift over time. Again, you wouldn't, I don't think you would see watermelons just growing out of the sand like that. Because I think a lot of the water in the desert is associated with rocks and groundwater. And, you know, those sand dunes are essentially just big piles of sand, so you're not getting down to the bedrock material. But here we have bedrock cropping out, and that could be containing groundwater that these plants are accessing. And plants and water are a little bit of a feedback loop, because the shade from plants will cool an area down and sort of protect it and help water stay in the soil or on top of the soil, not evaporate immediately. that means that these little pockets of trees are going to have a microclimate of slightly higher humidity than the surrounding areas. And it's getting to nighttime, it's too cold. It's a desert, there's not enough water in the air to moderate temperatures, so they swing really wildly when there's no radiation. That was a palm. The desert palms are morphologically different from the beach palms here. So here we traveled to another part of the desert, and we're just going to check out this oasis really quickly. This is going to be an upwelling of groundwater. That's a dog I like. You can see it's coming out of bedrock. And the ground is hard. And there's a little bit more vegetation here in this area. A lot of these palm trees with fruit on them. And then we're going to go up into some of these desert highlands slightly. This is a really nice example of sedimentary rock. Different layers of sandstone. I'm not a geologist, but different layers will be representative of different eons, I guess, different epochs, and, dominant climates and whatever while that was going on. Usually sedimentary rock like this means it was, depositional. So it's the bottom of a lake, the bottom of an inland ocean, and sediment accumulates over time. And geologic time is just bananas. There's sand falling down. Deposition in real time. And what I'm doing here is slowly getting up there. A lot of climbing. And you can see the temperature drop as we keep going up. Again, the air's capacity to hold moisture will be reduced by the decreased temperature. So we do start to see some snow, but I think this is the game's example of a very dry, cold area as opposed to a humid, cold climate. Some slight distinctions there. Yeah, here we are. So the desert's to the south here. These are some of the highest elevations, I think, in the game. You can see some berries growing on trees. Shrubs. There's also these plants, like to the left there, that are reminiscent of desert plants. So the landscape is trying to tell us that, you know, it's cold, there's snow, but it's also kind of dry. Dry cold. Think like American Southwest, high elevations in wintertime. Thought this was interesting. These little trees, saplings, deciduous looking. I don't know what they're doing there. Maybe they're meant to be shrubs. They shouldn't have leaves on them, but can't be perfect here. Still going up. Oh, these mushrooms growing straight out of the rock strikes me as not exactly accurate, but they want you to have some resources you can collect. In all areas, I suppose. There's one of those trade-offs, gameplay, reality trade-offs. I think this is the closest we get to tundra in the game, and we only ever see it in... It's alpine tundra, so there's really no, like, summer season to see. I'm trying not to fight that guy in the background. I just want to get up here and look to the south. See the desert. There's a sort of a ridge between the desert and that semi-arid grassland to the east. And then looking sort of to the northeast, it's across the whole continent here. And wrapping up our low latitudes here. So yeah, you can still have super cold areas even in a low latitude equatorial place. I mean, you take out take a look at South America, you see that kind of thing if the altitude gets high enough. The elevations get high enough. Alright, so here we're going to check out some mid-latitude stuff. You can see deciduous forest, some grassland. So this area, I would venture to guess the areas that you see trees are where there's enough soil deposited to support them. Because the higher areas are grassy, there's probably not a lot of soil there. It's fallen down into these sort of bottomlands. And that's where we see more biomass accumulated, more trees growing. You can see this is a wetter area already. More humid, more moist. Some groundwater. Here we are. A lot of outcrops. This map in general is pretty rocky. I think where we are, we're not used to seeing so much bedrock. But it's one of those things you keep in mind that the game designers are all, you know, Japanese, and Japan's a pretty rocky country. Here I just want to cut some grass, and I got rice. Check it out. Which tells me I'm in a warmer, humid place. I only get one bundle of rice. They didn't give me a second one. So I'm possibly in the subtropics, because rice needs a long, warm season to grow. And I've got some trees and forests here. And looking across to those kind of dome-looking mountains, that's where we're going next. This is a very typical geography for I want to say karst topographies. This rock looks like this because it is soluble in water, so in a humid climate it will dissolve pretty readily, and it makes these domed pillar type shapes. This is interesting little village. I'm pretty sure these are bean plants. There's other plants growing around. This pretty clearly to me is modeled after like a pre-modern Japanese town or village. the pine trees that you see here look like Japanese pines. There's weeping cherries and some apple trees, and that flowering tree was a plum, I think. And then there's even irises growing in this water. So, I think here I decided to make a fire in advance to daytime so we can see better. And we're looking into the center of the continent, which I will call moist or humid continental. And I think I'm going to see out over this. It's a lowland in the center. It's some of the lowest elevation on the map. And you can see the river. And there's a lot of like mist and fog coming up, so that's telling us that the air is humid. And that's supporting the trees. There's also probably a lot of good soil down there. It's a little bit of a closer view. Because this could be like an old floodplain, so a lot of deposited rich soils from the river and some of the other hydrology. Again, it's a fantasy world, so, you know, you can only take it so far, but just from making observations, that's where I'd go with this. You can see we're looking to the south. Those highlands to the right is where we were before we came over here. And that's looking like almost due west. And we're gonna hop over this lowland. And now we're looking east. Actually, that's north, and we're gonna slowly kind of pan to the east and down in that lowland, that bottom land. That's what we were looking at from the other side a second ago. And there's those desert highlands. This spot is interesting, that snowy mountain. If you compare it to the other high elevations, it seems to have snow even though it's not that tall. And that's because this area I just pointed out is it's the place where you start the game. So it's meant to be like a mini version of the entire rest of the map. And that's so that you can sort of learn how to play the game before you get set loose on this whole giant world. So there's a reality gameplay trade-off there. And now we're getting into sort of semi-arid, higher elevation. I don't know if I'd call it high desert. It's probably a little bit more moist than high desert. But again, you know, it's a spectrum. So these grasses are supported by however much, you know, moisture is here. This is an interesting part of the map. It makes me think of like northern Arizona. Sedona, Flagstaff. I don't know why that could be completely inaccurate. It's been a long time since I've been there. But that's what it sort of evokes for me. Again, a lot of bedrock. This is going to be another area where we'll have big swings in temperature between day and night, or when there's not a lot of solar radiation coming in. Vegetation helps to hold precipitation. So that's that positive feedback. And then here, the elevation's gone up a bit. There we are. And we're gonna follow that road to the northeast. So we're gonna get into some high elevation stuff. And we are getting rainfall here. I'm sure you noticed. So, you know, when we say semi-arid, it doesn't mean dry all the time. But we are going to climb in latitude and altitude here. And there's our transition. Now it's too cold. And this to me looks like the sort of moist cold subtype. Of a high latitude climate. So this is evocative of your boreal forests. Lots of pine trees, lots of tall pines. These trees are adapted to, the boughs are at angles so that like heavy snow loads will fall off instead of breaking the branch. And then to the left there are some, and to the right, there's some deciduous trees. And I think they're meant to look like birch, which is generally adapted to colder climates. And you can see that farther to the west, it gets up into the mountains. And they're forested as well with these pines. Probably pines and also firs, spruces. There we are. So we're gonna come around that bend and start heading south again. And there's a big elevation drop when that happens. So this snow is gonna turn to rain. Here we are on the other side of that gorge. And this is, I think there's some, yeah, trying to avoid these guys. This is mid to high latitude, semi-dry continental grassland. I don't know if I really want to call it, you can call it moist, but it's not really arid either. Somewhere in between, as we are seeing trees and shrubs, but again, the short stature of the vegetation right here probably has to do with poor soils. Just trying to take clues from what I can observe. We're heading south, more or less. You can see there's a body of water to the left or to the east. Oh, I think yeah, I wanted to eat. That's how you get health back. So that body of water could be creating a little microclimate that's supporting more vegetation, more biomass, but we're still at kind of a mid to high latitude. This is still pretty coniferous, you know, needled trees as we head south. A lot of fog and mist coming up from the ground. It's telling us there's water. I mean, it is raining, but there's probably also moisture coming off of that body of water. There we are. And now, all the way back over to the east, there's the ocean, looking east, and we're at a high latitude. I would venture to say that this is not a snowy world because of the ocean right there, sort of moderating temperatures. And we're also right next to a volcano, so it's going to warm things up a bit. But there's a lot of lightning in this area. A lot of thunderstorms. And if you go into the shelter, you're fine. But you can see what I have equipped is a wooden shield, but I think I have a metal bow and a metal sword. And so my shield in the blue that's equipped will not attract lightning, but my bow and my sword do. And I just left it on to show you that you do have to, you know, be careful and adjust to your environment in the elements out here. These little stables are kind of scattered around the map, a place where you can cook and rest, but they all have these recipes. You can see, I think this is a custard recipe. It's wheat and cane sugar and eggs and butter. It sounds tasty. And I waited the storm out because you can see better when it's a little bit more clear. There's a wetland down there. It's like spongy and boggy. Could be a lot of groundwater, could be a soil type that doesn't infiltrate water readily. And make a bog. You can see the rock type here is similar to the volcanic rock, just slightly to the west. There's a lot of grassland. You know, that could be itself a gameplay trade-off because it's easier to see farther, see where you're going. There aren't a ton of trees blocking your view. Here we are. We're gonna go down by that spiral peninsula. And in that lowland there, the East Akala Plains, yep, down there. It's something interesting that happens, I think. I'm still seeing a lot of bedrock cropping out. Sorry, buddy. Some shrubs. I mean, I would still call this, you know, humid maritime, mid to high latitude. This is probably supposed to be evocative of either areas of northern Japan, or I'm thinking of like maritime Canada. Which would probably be more heavily forested, but I think the height of the grass is trying to indicate something about climate. Here, it's always right here. All of a sudden there's lightning. There's also a lot of biodiversity here. A lot more, you know, species of flower and stuff. And then right up to the edge. I think I wanted to see if the land breeze and sea breeze were accurate. So at night, there should be a breeze coming in from the ocean, and then in the daytime there should be a breeze coming off of the land. And it looks like this is coming in from the ocean if you look at the clouds. And that has to do with the differential rates of air warming over land versus water. So yeah, I'm gonna advance to, I think, noon tomorrow. Yeah, and we'll see what the wind is doing. Yeah, it's still kind of coming off the water. And I got blue skies. It's all clear. When we hit that one spot, we're gonna have lightning again. I haven't quite puzzled that one out. And usually thunderstorms are the result of hot and cold air masses hitting each other. So maybe there's a hot air mass from a volcano and a cold air mass off the water. Cooler air mass from the water and a hotter air mass from the land. It's always in this spot. And then you run through and clears up. Okay. So we kind of already did high latitude continental. And I think from here I want to show this little kind of different spot. It's coastal, mid-latitude, kind of scrubby pine stuff going on. And this is something that you see like in really coastal microclimates, because there's a lot of wind, which can be hard on plants. So Some of the plants that you see adapted to this kind of area can tolerate the wind, and also salinity. So maritime refers specifically to salt water. And, salt tolerance can be an important adaptation for plants in areas like this. And this is going to be temperate, so it will have, cold and warm seasons, different times of the year. Hyrule herb. I'm sure in all these videos I'm going to be collecting Hyrule herb, so take note, we'll talk about it later on. But it's kind of everywhere, and that is important. You can see very short, mossy, lichen-y stuff growing in these rocks. So it's moist, it's humid. There's just not a lot of soil there because it's bare bedrock. You can see some changes in the soil and the rock here as well. Another subtype of this, we're getting more vegetation, taller grasses, some shrubs. That could be a soil change, just less bedrock popping out. Oh, and here we are in the middle of the continent, that lowland. I wanted to make sure we visited here before we finished. This is an interesting little fast-moving river. I don't know if you remember me saying that the faster the water moves, the bigger the particles it can carry. So you can see how difficult it is to swim across. You can also see how big the cobbles or rocks are at the bottom of this riverbed. So you'd see big cobbles like that on a fast-moving river. And on a slow-moving river, it would be siltier, smaller particles. No rice. Again, this is one of the lowest elevations in the map. I'm going to call this moist continental subclimate. We've got deciduous forest, we've got tallgrass prairie, and I want to show one of my favorite parts of this map, and we'll have a whole day on this one topic, but these apple trees, this is a whole forest of apples, and it's probably an overgrown orchard. So there was a huge population decline in this game world about 100 years before the present day. And, you know, you can assume that this apple orchard... See, these are all apple trees, but there's no apples on them. So I think the apples spread out from here and, you know, colonized the rest of that field. And that kind of tells you that the climatic conditions are sufficient to support apples just kind of growing wild, which means there's enough humidity and warm enough temperatures in the summertime, but also apples have what's called a chill requirement. So it has to be, and it has to get cold enough in winter and warm enough in summer, which is kind of interesting. We can't grow apples here in Florida. It just doesn't get cold enough. So I wanted to just kind of tool around this field, kind of get to the middle of the map and show these forests. They're pretty spread out. You know, they're not a super dense forest. I think we can make guesses about the historical use of these lands. You can see there's some ruins here. So was this all farmed? Was this all grazed? Did that affect whether or not trees were able to grow here? I just had a battle, I guess. I meant to cut this out, but I'm trying to get some stuff from the robot I fought. But that is an old homestead that we're running through, so, you know, are these trees just kind of slowly colonizing this field again? If we waited another couple 100 years, would this all be forest? And I guess that's one sort of component that we haven't talked about too much, which is time, and the time that it takes for these different landscapes to develop. So this is about it. You can see looking south and west to these highlands. To the left, no rice. And then south again. Can't see the rainforest, but we can see the desert highlands. That's the kind of alpine world, and then volcanic area, and just to the south of that, south and east, that tower sticking up, that's where the sort of autumnal area begins. You can see those distinctive pillars of rock. That's that traditional Japanese type village, and then to the south again.